In some of the world's most extreme locations, foggy vistas, frozen landscapes and along ragged edges, life prevails. In the harshest conditions, in line with the steady, age-old precedent of the seasons, nature offers up hope year upon year, often in a tiny package.
It's this package with a baby plant with some food, and then that it has this protecting coat around it. So it's really a package of life.
Seeds, in one handy little kit, can start revolutions depending on where they fall. They offer us a chance to feed ourselves today, but also capture, store, and even design the landscapes of the future. Which is why scientists are working against the clock to capture those highly specialised species that are about to become extinct.
I think in 50 years' time, if we weren't doing this work and hadn't been doing this work for all of this time now, well, I'd find the world quite a scary and depressing place, actually. There would have been many more species extinctions. We would not know as much as we do about the habitats around the world and how we can help preserve them. We would have lost a lot of vital resources that we rely on as humanity. Those medicines, those foods, even just the natural beauty of these environments could have been lost to us.
Welcome to Unearthed, Nature Needs Us, from the Royal Botanic Gardens Kew. I'm Dr. Maya Rose Craig. This time, we'll find out how seeds can help us respond to changing climates, restore lost or threatened habitats, and how local knowledges and traditions can inform this science. Dr. Eleanor Bremen is the Senior Research Leader at Kew's Millennium Seed Bank at Wakehurst, the world's largest seed bank for wild plant species.
Seed banking is crucial to all life because all life is ultimately dependent on having these vegetation and habitats that we see around us. If we didn't preserve seeds from all around the world, we'd be losing a lot of diversity. There is no other seed bank that is doing what we do. Biodiversity of seeds is really important because that's the adaptive ability of a species there. So if you haven't captured the genetic diversity in that collection, then you're not giving that species the best possibility into the future.
Eleanor's based at the Millennium Seed Bank, as is Tim Pearce, the African Partnerships Coordinator.
We're actually on the most biodiverse place on the planet here in the vaults downstairs. We've got nearly 45,000 species of plant preserved as seeds. Out there is a whole lot of genes that we need to conserve because many genes out there will be very, very useful for human use, because it all does boil down to that. That's why humans do conservation. That's what drives it. And the use of plants has been unsustainable. It's been exploitative. It's been opportunistic. But now we're realizing, well, that can't go on. It's got to be planned. It's got to be sustainable.
Eleanor and Tim's work with the Millennium Seed Bank takes them all over the world. What's more, the partner institutions that work with Kew are integral to making sure the science reflects the botanical and mycological diversity of global climate zones and habitats.
My name is Dr. Yayan Wahyu Chandra Kusuma. I work at Research Center for Ecology and Ethnobiology.
Yayan works under the National Research and Innovation Agency in Bogor, Indonesia. They partner with Kew on the Threatened Biodiversity Hotspots program, amongst other projects.
If species is gone extinct, it's almost impossible to return them back as what it should be. So it is important to conserve plant species. There are so many destructions on our ecosystem, especially forest ecosystem, where forests converted into agricultural areas, into minings, and etc., where we need to restore those ecosystems back to where they were. That is why the seed collections also play important roles as a seed source for seedlings that are suitable for restoration projects across the globe. We can preserve a lot of seeds within a small areas.
The process of collecting, drying, preserving and using seeds is complex, but technology and international collaborations have accelerated the rate at which we carry out this work. Without research and conservation, some species would go extinct under changing climate pressures. Food security is a huge driver of the work to find species that are better adapted to changing landscapes and conditions, and to protect the genetic diversity of what we still have for medicines, materials, buildings, and more. And although the current extinction rate presents a gloomy headline, as scientists, we know there is still hope. At Wakehurst's Millennium Seed Bank, also referred to as the MSB in Sussex, visitors to the gardens can get an insight into the work that goes on here.
It is unique.
I'm just amazed at how many seeds you've got here.
This bank has 10% of the world's bankable seeds, which is just unfathomable.
It's so important that we can have all this treasure for the future, because that's what it is, it's treasure.
More than 2.4 billion seeds from 40,000 different species are safely stored at the MSB. This research centre borrowed and built upon technology from the agricultural crop industry, with the goal of collecting and storing seeds from the world's wild plants. In 2000, the facility opened, partnered with trained collaborators around the world, and it continues to be a global research and training centre today.
We were very clear that what we had at our fingertips was a fantastic partnership of people that wanted to develop their own technologies in country, their own seed banks, and use that technology, use that capacity that they built in the management of their own resources.
Tim Pearce says that the seed bank is more than a museum. This living, working and unique trove of biodiversity allows scientists to ask the next big question: how to use these seeds to restore and create the habitats of the future.
The challenge now is about saying, and this is just a tool in the armoury of making sure that we can recreate, if necessary, or respond to any damaging activities that are going on, what we call in situ. So in situ is where we want to be. We want self-sustaining, successful habitats, recreating themselves, growing themselves, delivering all the ecosystem services that they deliver: food, medicine, water retention, soil stability. If there is forest degradation, you want to restore forests, conserve seeds in a seed bank so that we can pop up wherever we're needed.
With this enormous resource available, the focus for restoration and recovery projects is now on how to keep seeds alive and ready for the day they can go back into the wild.
The majority of the material that we have in the seed banks here and in the seed banks in countries, they've never been looked at in terms of their germination behaviour. How do you turn a seed back into plants? Most countries around the world would have a national tree seed centre. The conservation seed banks, like the Millennium Seed Bank and like all the partner seed banks around the world, we're more interested in making sure that we add resilience to the suite of tools that conservationists have. So if you can keep a seed alive for 20, 30 years, it's actually quite useful, because the in situ situation might not be ready for us to return those seeds back to the wild.
There's motivation for scientists to go far beyond what is economically useful in seed conservation. Certain species can form the basis for healthy habitats, providing framework for insects, wildlife, including pollinators and birds, which in turn helps it become resilient and self-sustaining. That's why it's also important to protect endangered species, as well as those that are endemic. And preserving species as seeds is a vital piece of conservation when human activity or climate change continues to pressure them in the wild.
I've seen things become so limited in their natural diversity that they are almost certainly going to go extinct in the wild. There's a plant called the African violet, which many people will know as being a house plant that's sold regularly in garden centres. And I've seen the site where the first African violet was collected from Tanzania, and I've seen that site decimated down to a handful of individual plants in my working life. Having been up Mount Kenya and the Aberdares and Kilimanjaro, there are such iconic plant communities at the top of those mountains, and that's where they live, at the top of the mountain. And as climate increases, and as those vegetation zones move up the mountain, because the top of the mountain gets slightly warmer, those plants don't have anywhere to go. They fall off the top of the mountain, as it were. So those are the kind of species that are in absolute peril, and we bank them, and let's hope that we can find a way to reverse this climate change and get those back onto the habitats where they belong.
Alice Livingstone is a botanical horticulturist and propagator at Wakehurst.
We're in my potting area, got my computer, my potting bench, just next door to 4 glasshouses that I look after. I grow seed from the bank till it flowers, and then we can verify what it is. And the flower gets pressed and sent to the herbarium and ID'd, and it can be labelled and go in the bank. So all seeds have different lengths of viability and different methods of germination. They need to be tested in the labs just to see whether or not they are still viable. So if we took them out today, could we use the seed? But some we are growing for conservation projects, some we're growing for regeneration projects, and some we grow, if we've got permission from the donor country, we can use them for display. So we've got 4 glasshouses this side of the nursery. This one doesn't go below 12 degrees C. The 2 in the middle are tropical and don't go below 18 degrees Celsius. And the one on the end goes down to 6 degrees Celsius. So in the one on the end, we've got Chilean plants and South African plants that can take it on the cooler side. What have I got? Oh, well, these dwarf milkworts, Polygala amarella, I've got some more just come in, but we're growing these for the Species Recovery Trust, for them to put into new sites or to bulk up existing populations. So there's a few threatened plants, UK plants, that we grow. So this is Glasshouse 2, which is a tropical glasshouse. It doesn't go below 18 degrees Celsius. We're growing some critically endangered acacias here for a pipeline project to pass on to other botanic gardens. We've got a table of South African plants here. It's Leucospermum conicarpodendron, and it was found in the Admiralty Archives in the Dutch trader's wallet, I believe. And so the seed was 203 years old when it was sown, and this is the resultant plant. I think they've got the original up at Kew, and these might be cuttings of it.
Turning seeds from around the world into plants that can thrive in West Sussex requires a great deal of expertise and the right conditions. But these are conditions that plants have evolved to throughout time, with plenty of help from the biological interactions with species around them. Our green earth wasn't always the landscape we recognise today. As Katie Field, Professor in Plant Soil Processes at the University of Sheffield, explained.
So 500 million years ago, Earth was generally a barren landscape. There were no land plants. Around 450, 500 million years ago, the first plants came out of the water and made landfall. And what we need to remember is at that time, there wasn't any soil on Earth's terrestrial land surfaces. And so the plants that were coming out of the water had very little they were able to get nutrients from. It was essentially bare rock. They needed help to try and get the nutrients that they need so that they could thrive and adapt to a life on land. Fungi have been around for a lot longer than plants. Terrestrial fungi particularly have been around for an awfully long time, and they managed to form associations with the earliest land plants. And through these associations, they helped those early land plants get access to nutrients that were probably bound up in the rocks or extract them from the biocrusts that were present at that time, the primordial soil crusts.
Katie's interest lies in the mysterious interactions between plant roots and soil fungi, which we know as mycorrhizas. Every day we're learning more and more about the importance of these relationships. Hope you're ready for a little chemistry.
We know that modern day mycorrhizas help plants get access to soil nutrients, and so it seems reasonable to suppose that these ancient mycorrhizal associations helped plants access soil nutrients in much the same way as modern plants get benefit from their fungal partners. In return, The early land plants, they were photosynthesizing, probably. I think it seems like a good assumption to make. And through photosynthesis, plants make sugars, and then they go on to make fats and sort of lipids and fatty acids. And they transfer these compounds to the fungus that's growing with them. And so you have this bidirectional exchange of carbon for nutrients, carbon in the form of sugars and fatty acids and lipids. And so through these associations, plants are able to get access to more nutrients than they would do otherwise. And that can only have helped them in their conquest of the land.
And there's a big picture to this process of carbon moving in and out of the Earth.
Over the last 500 million years, Earth's gone through an awful lot of upheaval in terms of climate, but also geological change as well, with moving of continents. These plant-fungal associations have persisted for an awful long time and have withstood and adapted to changes in climate, but also evolution of other organisms that might also predate on the plant hosts, for instance, so plant pathogens or insect herbivores, grazers. And similarly, the plants have had to evolve. They've had to kind of adapt to this increasing complexity of potential parasites. And so you've had this co-evolution over 500 million years, which have had their role as well. I mean, it's not just them adapting to the Earth and adapting to the climate. They've also had an impact on climate itself. So we're currently undergoing a period of unprecedented climate change. And I think in particular, it's the rapidity of that climate change and shift in sort of weather patterns and changing atmospheric composition. And I think one of the major challenges associated with that is that there simply isn't enough time for things to co-evolve, to adapt to that. So yeah, it seems kind of a bit abstract to think that these pretty much invisible fungi that live in the roots of land plants could impact on something as high impact as the climate. But actually the two are quite intimately linked. So by helping plants access more nutrients in the soil, so essential things like nitrogen and phosphorus that plants need to grow, the fungus actually helps power increasing biomass. And an inherent part of that is an increase in photosynthetic rate and productivity. Now, plants during photosynthesis draw carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. And so if they've got sufficient nutrient resources to do more of it, they will do more of it. So by associating with fungi that improve their access to these nutrient sources, they actually help increase the rate of photosynthesis. But when you think it's sort of geological timescales and those early plants as they were coming onto land, and these are the first terrestrial photosynthetic organisms, this could have had quite a dramatic impact on the global climate. In increasing biomass as plants get bigger and evolve greater complexity so that they can increase their efficiency of photosynthesis and draw more carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, what that does is in turn it leads to a greater concentration of oxygen, which eventually leads to a breathable atmosphere. And it also drives a drop in global temperatures. If you remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, you reduce global temperatures overall. Now, what we don't know is the significance of that at a global scale at that time. Some of the research that we're doing, certainly in collaboration with paleoclimate modelers, is to try and understand how important these associations between early plants and soil fungi were in sculpting Earth's climate, sort of from 450 million years ago right through to present day. Our early results suggest, they were probably quite important, actually.
The fungi kingdom has helped shape our planet through time. It's plain to many scientists that a deeper understanding of them could be key in helping us to adapt to future fluctuations in global temperatures.
We need to know more in order to understand the impact of these associations at a global scale. We need to look at sort of crossing disciplines. So a lot of the work that we do to understand these sorts of associations at those scales involves collaboration with geologists, geochemical modelers, global climate modelers, as well as chemists and physicists. So, it's a really multidisciplinary issue.
Our planet is always changing, and if its future is one that includes humans, then we need to ask what practices we must let go of, and what knowledge we must draw upon to change its course. Whereas research and science can yield new insights, perhaps from that invisible world of fungi, or the mysteries locked up in rare seeds, there is another asset in plain sight. Many local communities or indigenous peoples have coexisted with their natural world sustainably for centuries. Integrating their knowledge of their environment with existing work is a path to supercharge a future that values all life and supports biodiversity. Martina Fjallberg is studying her master's in geoscience, but her family is from a reindeer herding district in the mid-north of Sweden. She is also the vice president of the youth organisation Sami Nura. She explained how the Sami people's deep connection and knowledge of nature is facing pressure from land use and climate change.
Sami people is an indigenous people, the only recognized indigenous people in the EU. So we live in Sweden, Norway, Finland, and Russia. We have always had a connection to nature, so our whole culture is based on that, as most indigenous people have. There's some of us Sami people who are reindeer herders. That's the Sami culture I grew up in, with reindeer herding, so it's a big part of who I am as a person. A lot of my values and my goals in life is strongly connected to that. Previously, reindeer herders had more access to their lands than we have today. We have a lot of mines and windmill farms and cities and other communities, railroads, roads, and it's really hard to be a reindeer herder today because of those things, because reindeer herding is so dependent of having these big aerial herding grounds, and today they're so fragmented that we have a lot more struggles. Every day you have to go out and try to herd reindeer off roads and off railroads and out from communities and cities. The small pieces of land we still have left where we can have reindeer herding are then being affected by climate change instead. Before you can have quite good winters, but now it's a lot of ice, which makes it quite hard for reindeers to dig down and get their food. We also have another pressure of predators during the winter that is quite hard, because the reindeer is confined to these smaller spaces. It's easier for predators to find them.
Sadly, these pressures are deterring the next generation of reindeer herders from following in families' footsteps, meaning that precious and intricate knowledge of these landscapes and their diversity is being lost.
Sami youth reindeer herders are one of the groups in society that has the highest suicide rate of all of the groups in Sweden. We've always had this relationship with nature that we take as much as sustainably possible, and we are grateful for that, and we respect nature for giving us life. We can see different pressures on reindeer, how it affects the reindeer herd and how it affects how many calves are born each year. And that relationship is then something that directly translates to how is nature feeling. Because the reindeer is a part of the ecosystem and we're a part of the reindeer. So then indirectly we're also part of the ecosystem in a way.
One particular food source for reindeer is the lichen found in alpine habitats. Lichens are an association between a fungus and an algae, or a cyanobacteria, an aquatic, photosynthetic kind of bacteria. As we heard earlier, photosynthesis is a process where carbon is exchanged in our ecosystem, and any change here also spells change for the reindeer and the peoples whose livelihoods depend on them.
Because lichen is quite sensitive to different atmospheric and air conditions, we have seen the tree lichen has had a decrease, but that directly translates to air quality and pollution, and something that's also then connected to climate change and everything. One of the big reasons why I actually started studying is because I want to be kind of like a bridge between the Sami community and the reindeer herding and science. At least in Sweden today, Sami people have a lot of traditional knowledge that's not being respected or not being valued. So I think I speak for almost all Sami people everywhere, that the first thing that we need is to get our rights and the rights to our land, because otherwise how are we supposed to do anything? As it is right now, we don't have the rights as indigenous people and the rights to our own land.
When the Millennium Seed Bank Partnership started, it began by focusing on collections in arid climates where useful plants and food security were under threat. But it's not just high temperatures or dry conditions that pose challenges and present clues to how life can survive at the extremes. That's why researchers will brave extremes of the planet to find and conserve diverse seeds. You heard from Dr. Eleanor Bremen at the start of this episode. In 2023, she led an expedition to Arctic Sweden to collect seeds for a project aimed at conserving Arctic plant diversity. In tough conditions, at low temperatures and high altitudes, the season for flowering, pollination and seed dispersal is short. But surface air temperature here is accelerating at a faster rate than other parts of the world, and we need to know how these changing conditions will threaten the unique species adapted to living here.
I have led a lot of expeditions and used to be an expedition leader. I've always got apprehensions about a trip, especially when you're meant to be leading it, until you get there and you actually see things for yourself. I'd say the landscapes here are just really inspiring. They're on such a massive scale and they're so beautiful, but at the same time they've got a kind of a harsh edge to them, which makes you feel like you are kind of somewhere very different, somewhere, a bit extreme.
The Abisko Research Station is used by scientists around the world exploring the impacts of climate change in the Arctic. This part of Sweden can be harsh in climate, leaving a long period of snow cover in the winter. Eleanor and a team were joined by a colleague, Stina Westrand, from Q's partner Gothenburg Botanical Garden. It's Stina you heard talking about those packages of life at the start of the episode.
We have to safeguard biodiversity, it's obvious. And since we cannot protect everything in nature, we have to do something more, and we have to do it fast. If we don't have the species knowledge, everything turns into a green mess.
The team headed for the hiking trails and beyond to seek out tiny plants, documenting where they grow and what is growing with them, as well as collecting seeds.
So this is where we're thinking of going today, around here. So we can just go.
Yeah.
Sian McCabe is a seed curator at Wakehurst. She normally works in the lab, but on the trip she was able to meet seeds in their natural environments for a change. She made sure the specimens the team collected were able to be stored at the best possible quality.
We don't just collect 1 or 2 seeds, we try to collect 10,000. You only harvest 20% of the population because you obviously want the plants to continue.
If you collect this one, how would you do it? Like that, and then just shake? Or?
Yeah, you shake it.
Collecting seeds in the field to get that 10,000 seed is very complicated. There's a calculation at the beginning. We need to make sure that this collection is a really good quality collection. So we need to take into consideration genetic diversity. A plant, if there's lots of seeds in one pod, we could technically collect 10,000 seeds from one plant, but each plant has a unique genetic diversity. So we need to collect a representative sample of the whole population.
You're entering into this different space and you can see the interactions of these plants and the conditions that they're experiencing.
In these 2, I've collected 50 fruits. I'm aiming for 2,000, so I have to stop at whatever that calculation is. So then we'll know if or when we're getting close to our target.
Neil Johnson is a botanical horticulturist who works within Q's Alpine team.
Alpine plants are unique because the fact that they have evolved to survive in a narrow range of conditions makes them very fragile to any changes which are taking place in their environment.
The team was joined by a leading Arctic botanist from Sweden to seek out the perfect locations for seeds on their target list. Maura Aronson has been visiting almost yearly since 1980 and has noticed some changes to the climate in that time.
The really problematic thing we start to see now is the mismatch between the plants flowering and the pollinators' appearance, as it's also more unpredictable when the spring is starting, when the rain is coming.
We've been averaging 4 collections a day, so this team is really motoring. It's been fantastic. And we've also already made a collection of a species that isn't held within the Millennium Seed Bank.
Across the 2-week trip, the group also hiked up to a remote research station to find more unique species and crop wild relatives. And as breathtaking as the landscape can be, it can also be unforgiving. That's why it's home to some of the toughest plant species on the planet.
The wind has been just howling at us. I think everyone's pretty exhausted. But then you've got this majestic landscape around you. You've got the sides of the valleys are towering up. There's snow now on the top of the mountains around us. The wind is just whistling through the valley and all these boulders. It's very dramatic here.
With no running water or electricity, in this boulder-strewn, windswept landscape, they had to gather up water from the river and fire up the mountain sauna to warm up.
These conditions are exactly the kind of conditions that alpine plants have to withstand, which makes them extremely unique. Collecting at Corcovado was definitely a challenge. The temperatures were 1 or 2 degrees and driving rain for hours on end.
Today has been wet and wild, I would say. The team have done amazingly well to get out in this weather and make collections. We've actually managed to make 6 collections up here, which has been fantastic. Because we're at a higher altitude, there's species that we haven't found lower down at some of the other sites we visited. But we have literally been crawling along the ground in a deluge, so everyone's waterproofs have had a full workout today.
After 2 days up the mountain, the team then took an early morning ferry to a new site, and at the end of the trip, collected 50 species, 20 more than they'd planned to.
The seeds have now been packaged up. I've got them all in my bag. They've been divided between 4 different programs, so some are going to Nordgen here in Sweden for storage. Some will go to Gothenburg Botanic Garden, where they're just starting to form a wild plant seed bank. Some are obviously coming back to the Millennium Seed Bank at Wakehurst for Kew. And then we're also supporting a further research program looking at climate change across the Arctic, along with researchers all around the world. It feels amazing to have this precious cargo in my bag as I'm leaving here. The Millennium Seed Bank, it uses science to provide hope, I think. We currently hold species that are already extinct in the wild. So because we have those seeds, it means they're not extinct completely. So we've prevented extinction. And it's only by working collaboratively, internationally, that we are ever going to get a handle on any of these large-scale challenges, such as biodiversity loss and climate change.
In Kew's colonial past as a botanic garden, scientists identified and used resources from around the world in their research. Thankfully, plant science today has evolved to be truly internationally collaborative. Today, Kew works with partner countries that have expertise in different plant areas. This may be in the form of local knowledge, endemic species, understanding of nuanced geography, or something else. But carrying out biodiversity research, conservation and restoration work so that everyone can benefit from it is vital to long-term success, especially when it comes to the communities that have stewarded environments for generations. Joycelyn Longdon is founder of Climate in Colour, an online education platform for the climate curious, where she aims to make climate conversation more accessible, diverse, and hopeful. She's also a PhD candidate at Cambridge University, where she's exploring emerging technologies for forest conservation with forest communities in Ghana. She met with guests at Kew Gardens to discuss how to keep people at the heart of conservation and research.
Today we're here in Kew's community allotment, snuggled into a nice cosy corner, surrounded by plants of many varieties and birds above us singing and chirping. The allotment here is an area where people of all abilities can come and learn more about plant science in a hands-on way, because engaging and valuing communities and their knowledge is crucial for carrying out successful research or conservation wherever it's taking place. I'm joined by Ben Town, the UK Nature Recovery and Community Science Coordinator at the Natural History Museum, and Charlotte Couch, Project Coordinator for Tropical Important Plant Areas in Guinea here at Kew. We're here to speak more about participation in conservation research. Charlotte, could you give us a bit more of an idea about what Tropical Important Plant Areas are and how Kew is working with communities on conservation in Guinea?
So, Tropically Important Plant Area, or a TIPA, as I'll refer to them because it's quite a mouthful, is identified through three main criteria. So we look at the number of threatened species, we look at botanical diversity and presence of socioeconomic species, and we also look at threatened habitat. And so a TIPA can be designated on any one of these criteria or a combination. So it's a way of using robust data to highlight areas of high plant biodiversity and how we can then protect those areas with governments and with communities. Tropical Important Plant Areas programme started in 2015 and is active in 6 or 7 countries now. We're adding all the time. In Guinea particularly, we work with local partners. So Kew works with our kind of mirror image organisation, which is the National Herbarium of Guinea, and we work with local NGOs and the forestry departments. You know, a lot of these areas vary in size enormously. So we've got tiny little sacred forests next to communities up to huge national park size. We've been doing a lot of community awareness raising about the flora, and we have been working with them to have community nurseries, tree nurseries, to raise those threatened tree species or threatened plant species in their area to then replant out around in the buffer zones, and also incorporating socioeconomic species. So species that are useful for those communities, so it gives them something back for also protecting the threatened flora.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and from my work as well, it's become so important how much livelihood and conservation intersect and overlap, the ways in which we can try and connect those two parts to be key and core to collaborative conservation.
Yeah, so we do a lot of co-design with communities to design our community science projects to benefit those on the ground. So it's really important to engage with these communities to design those from the ground up, to ensure that they're benefiting the areas. An example of that, our Nature Overheard project, we went out to schools to ask what questions they want to hear about. Through a process of design, we came up with an insect roadside community science project, which has been running for 2 years now. The main work that we do and are hoping to do going forward is looking at projects that we've established in the UK, such as our Big Sea research, and how we can apply that to our overseas territories. We've currently running that in the Falkland Islands since 2 years ago. What works well with small groups of children in suburbs in London won't particularly work in much more sparsely populated areas like the Falkland Islands. For some people, their only experience of nature is at school. So it's all about the messaging and what is practical for engagement. And so there's a lot of community-led teaching. So we're engaging with those communities and teaching as much as we can over a screen for them to then go and deliver that training and deliver that programme in a way that they know works best for their community.
Yeah, so as part of our ongoing research programme, we have a Guinean PhD student working on a national list of useful plant species that is based on information gathered with communities, all through prior informed consent. We're quite conscious of a lot of those custodians of that knowledge are maybe the elders in those villages, and it's not necessarily being passed down. It relates to the livelihoods thing as well, in terms of they may have a way of harvesting something sustainably. Younger generation perhaps don't know those.
Yeah, I think it's a really important point and note about collaborative conservation, in the sense that it's not just collaboration between the researcher and a community as a homogenous group, but actually also collaboration within the community and an exchange of knowledge, not just from Global North to Global South, but also within different generations.
I think one of the real key aspects of citizen, or as we call it, community science, is it enables a researcher to have a much wider reach in terms of manpower, in terms of you can get a much wider group of people engaged in the subject matter, out on the ground in the field, doing these research, learning, enriching their environment and creating advocates as well, while you're concentrating on evaluating that data. With the Falkland Islands, for example, we can't send a researcher out there to do seaweed surveys every week, but they've got a dedicated team of locals who can.
Yeah, I think what motivates people is very interesting and quite important. And majority of the population, for example, in Guinea, I wonder if it's the same in Ghana, but there's about 60% of the population is rural in Guinea. And so if we can give people a greater understanding about how to preserve those for the future, or a better way of harvesting or getting better yields, then they're much more likely to want to go out and help us collect data and be involved in those projects.
So Kew works with a lot of partner institutions around the world. Why do you think it's important to develop these methodologies for research and collaboration that can be transferred to different regions?
So the TPAS programme particularly, that methodology gives you sound data and sound research to base not just protection but also policy on as well. So being able to identify all of the threatened species in your area, in your country, is incredibly important because you need to know what is there before you can protect it. And certainly in many countries that data isn't there yet, or it's not disseminated.
Yeah, and it seems that this kind of transfer of knowledge is something that's very common within conservation, especially between sort of civil society, local communities, NGOs and research. But I know less about how government sort of gets involved and maybe the overlap and intersection of participatory methods or collaboration that joins maybe government, civil society and communities together, or that brings government into this work.
We're helping to develop policy as well. So most recently we've used the data that we've been collecting through our partners and through the fieldwork that we've been doing and translating that into a national conservation action plan for threatened trees of Guinea. This isn't a new thing for West Africa, certainly. Ghana's just developed one, and there's one developing in Kenya as well. And so we got our inspiration from those two. But I think it's also teaching that next generation that that's kind of the way to go forwards, not sitting outside and being a researcher, but kind of being in the middle and really engaging with people.
So moving on, there's quite a large intersection between food security and insecurity and biodiversity conservation. It'd be interesting to hear from both of you how these two kind of issues intersect.
One of the things that we have been looking more recently in Guinea is sustainable agriculture and agricultural heritage as well. Agriculture is one of the major drivers of deforestation, particularly in Guinea and possibly most of West Africa. We have a PhD student working on local yams, another one who is working on the markets around edible fungi. And we have another PhD student working on a local nut called bansuma. It's got a really high protein content, higher than peanuts. So it could be a really important source of protein going forwards.
A bit closer to home than Guinea is the rewilding aspects of the UK. Engaging with lived-in communities, engaging with areas that are used for food growing, trying to see where in those places we can add a bit of biodiversity, where we can rewild certain aspects of sites. Especially looking at some of the national parks, is adopting the method that's been used in national parks in the UK versus the one in the US, where they are a lived-in community, they are an area where people work and people live, they're not a pristine nature reserve. And applying that model across the UK to where we can take those little gains in creating a biodiversity network across the UK, increasing marginal gains in certain sites, larger sites having much larger gains. The education estate, for example, hoping to try and increase biodiversity there, and allowing a space to be a food growing space, but also somewhere that's nature rich and people can grow and enjoy, and the health benefits that you get from that as well.
And I guess part of that is also educating people on the complexity of the ecosystems that they live within, and also placing themselves within those ecosystems as well.
Definitely. It's seeing humans as a part of the landscape, not something to be removed, essentially.
The way we do science must evolve to reflect a fairer society. And through education, integration and collaboration with local communities, we can make sure that everyone can have a voice and share in potential benefits. Collecting seeds from around the world not only allows us to protect the future of our most threatened species, but to learn from the plants that have adapted to the extremes of our climate. It also gives us hope that we might be able to regenerate lost habitats or support the resilience of new or evolving ones. Advances in DNA technology and genomics are allowing us ever more insight into the incredible properties, the fungi, and the interactions between different kingdoms that could prove useful in medicine, industry, or agriculture in the future. And by carrying out our collaborative fieldwork, research, and restoration projects with countries and communities that have expertise and can share in resources, we can ensure that we build a future where no one is left behind.
We saw through the global pandemic recently that when there is a need, resources can be found and people can be mobilised and change can happen. And I think we need that kind of urgency to address these issues.
Next time on Unearthed, Nature Needs Us, we look at how pollinator health is essential to the lives of flowering plants and everything that depends upon them. I'll be back in 2 weeks. You can find out more about Kew's work and support their vital scientific and educational work at kew.org. And don't forget, you can catch up on earlier series of the podcast on this feed too. Please follow and subscribe. I'll see you again soon.